Welcome. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Pastor Daniel, and I want to welcome you to Deepening Your Faith. Really, what we're trying to do here is equip you guys to understand that faith isn't something, it's not just wishful thinking, that faith is something that we have trust in, that we have good reason to believe in, and that we trust in that. And so we want to give you good reasons to believe in Jesus Christ and his life, death, and resurrection, how to make a sound, valid argument for the gospel, and to deepen your faith. And so that's what we're here to do. We have special guest speaker Brett Kunkel here tonight. I'll introduce him in a few minutes. This is the first quarter of classes. So this quarter is called Smart Faith. It's 4 classes long in January. We have future classes in spring. That quarter is on studying the Bible, how to study it. So we're going to go in depth on how to properly study the Word of God. And then in the summer, we're going to have a systematic theology class. And then finally, in the fall, we're going to have a class on heresies, how to tell truth from lies. What is a heresy, what is not? And we're going to be studying the nature of Christ, the Trinity in that class, and that'll be a really exciting class. And that'll kind of be our capstone class for the year. Now, there's 2 ways that you can take deepening your faith. You can do the edification track, and all that means is you come, show up, enjoy great teaching, and leave. There's no homework, there's no reading to do. If you want to get the certificate at the end of the year, you need to do the certificate track. And with that, there's reading to do ahead of time for each class. And then at the end of each quarter, so at the end of January, there will be a test that will test your knowledge of the content that we went over. And then at the end of the year, there will also be a 3 to 5 page paper to write on the entire year's worth of classes. So you can be here whether you did reading or not, but to get that certificate, you got to do the reading for the class. With that said, all of our books, there's 3 books required for deepening your faith. The first is Smart Faith by J.P. Moreland. Now, we are out of these. And when I say when we are out of these, I mean like the country is out of them. If you have one, you might want to sell it on eBay. You could probably get a good $100 for it. So I think today I saw 3 left in the bookstore, and those are literally like the 3 remaining Smart Faith books. The good news is this. Smart Faith is simply a simplified version of Love Your God with All Your Mind by J.P. Moreland. So, if you're getting to things a little bit late, if they're all out of Smart Faith, you can substitute Smart Faith with Love Your God with All Your Mind. Similar content, this is just a little bit more in depth. Honestly, this is a better book to have as far as a resource. There's going to be more information in there to help you with your faith. Finally, there's these 2 books, which kind of look like kids' books, but they're homeschool curriculum for 15 on up to adults, and it's actually, don't not take it seriously because of the cartoons. It's very helpful. It's a nice introduction to reasoning and to logic and to argumentation. So these are the other 2 books that are required. The first is The Fallacy Detective, and the second is The Thinking Toolbox. The bookstore is also out of those. They'll get more the middle of this week. All of these books are available on ebook at Amazon.com. So you can still get Smart Faith on Amazon.com for only $7.99 if you get it in Kindle version. These 2 books are both $9.99 on Kindle at Amazon.com. You can download it onto your smartphone, your iPad, Android device, and get these books that way. But these will be in physically the middle of the week at our bookstore. You can also get them on Amazon.com physically as well. I passed around a sign-in sheet. If you're taking the certificate track, part of your attendance is, or part of your grade in the class is based on your attendance. So you want to check in every week and put whether you did your reading or not. Now, if you're one of those people that you weren't able to do your reading because there are no books, that's fair. Just let me know that on the attendance sheet, or email me and let me know, hey, I wasn't able to do my reading because the books don't exist anymore. And we'll make an exception for that. You can get the substitute book and make up the reading for next week. This is Lenny Esposito. He'll be helping teach the classes this quarter. And I want to now introduce our speaker for today, Brett Kunkel. Yes.
Just one announcement. If this stuff is intriguing to you, I want to let you know that there's a special bonus class to which you can go this month. Our monthly apologetics class meets the second Monday of the month, which is the 14th, so it's a week from tomorrow. And this month specifically, I'm going to be talking on a related topic. Now, you don't have to go, and it's not part of the certificate, but it is, how do we know that we know? Or how do we know what knowledge is? How do we know knowing? And we've had a lot of mixed. As a matter of fact, I think in the Bludenberg, it talks about the end about science and knowledge. And you hear a lot of people claim that, the only way you can know anything is by science. And I want to talk to you about other ways of knowing that will dovetail really nicely into this. So just FYI, if you're interested, Monday nights, January 14th at 7 o'clock, that'll be kind of your bonus lecture if you're one of those extra credit kind of people. That's where you can go to. So
thank you, Lenny. So our guest speaker today is Brett Kunkel. He's an apologist for Stand to Reason, which is an excellent apologetics ministry. You can go to their website, www.str.org, and they have a wealth of information there. We've had their senior apologist, Greg Kolkel, not to be mistaken with Brett Kunkel, here speaking on Friday night. So if you want answers to hard questions, str.org is a great website to go to. Brett is a friend of the ministry. He's a great teacher, an excellent man of God, and I now like to welcome Brett Kunkel up.
Well, before we get into the material today, I just need to preface my talk. For the last week, I've been laying prostrate, and I wasn't worshiping the Lord. I've been sick in bed for the last week. So last Sunday night, I started feeling sick, and I've been down and out this entire week. And the fog of sickness kind of lifted a little bit yesterday. So that might explain why I might start coughing uncontrollably. Just know that as I do, I'm releasing lots of infectious bacteria into the air, and so I apologize if I infect any of you. But I am well medicated, okay? In fact, I may be too well medicated today, so if I speak a little incoherently, please forgive me. I am excited about this class. I really am excited about this class. I am excited to see a church raising the bar for us. I am excited to see on this syllabus that on January the 27th, you have a comprehensive exam. Aren't you excited about that? Okay, maybe painful for some of you, but that's good pain. And it is time that we in the church raise the bar for our people. And that is what is happening here. Obviously, there is a hunger for it. Many of us want a lot more than the typical evangelical church is offering. And I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you in this. For some of you, maybe this is kind of a step back into school from, maybe you haven't had class, maybe you haven't had requirements, you haven't had required reading, you haven't had to worry about an exam in a while. And maybe I talked to a few of you earlier who said they're a little bit nervous about this. That's okay. That's probably a good thing. I want to encourage you to stick with this. I want to encourage you to do the reading. Even if that means you read a page and you go, I don't know what I just read, and you have to go back and reread the page. If you want to force growth in your life, one of the best ways to force growth is to put yourself in increasingly difficult situations. And those things will often force growth that otherwise you would not experience. And so if this is a little challenging, if the course content is challenging, that's okay. But I want you to stick with it. It's like exercising. If you haven't exercised your mind in a while, guess what? Your mind's going to be rusty. If I haven't gone to the gym and bench pressed for a while, and I go for the first time and I can't get up 200 pounds, well, guess what? Do I give up? No, I start with a lower weight. I keep at it until eventually I build that up. And so I want to encourage you, your mind is like a muscle. And I want to encourage you to develop it and strengthen it through the next month for the glory of God, okay? And I think the stuff that you're reading and the material that you're exposed to, I think, and this is not an overstatement, I think it'll have, for some of you, it'll have such an impact on you that it'll actually give you new ways to even think about being a Christian. Seriously. It may open a whole new kind of paradigm and world to you of the Christian life and how rich and how deep the Christian life can be. Okay? So let me open us in prayer before we jump into this. Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity to love you with all that we are, including our minds. And Lord, my prayer is that today you might encourage and challenge every single person who's here. And Lord, I pray that you would protect them from discouragement, but encourage and challenge them and motivate them to stick this out and to learn and to dive deep into this material and to work through the misunderstandings and the difficult material and the things that they can't understand and the challenging content. And I pray, Lord, that you would use this class to begin to equip these folks to make a difference for the gospel in our culture. We pray these things in the true name of Christ. Amen. In 2009, George Barna did a survey. It's a survey he's done pretty much for, with kind of intervals of 5 years. I think it was in 2009, he did one in 2005, and I think he did it in 2000, really surveying people in the United States and trying to figure out, do Americans have a biblical worldview? And in the survey, there were 6 things that you had to affirm to be counted as one who has a biblical worldview. You had to affirm that there are absolute moral truths that exist. Number 2, you had to affirm that the Bible is totally accurate in all of the principles it teaches. Number 3, you had to affirm that Satan is a real being and not merely a symbolic figure. Number 4, you had to affirm the idea that you cannot earn your way into heaven by good works. Number 5, you had to affirm that Jesus Christ lived a sinless life on earth. And number 6, you had to affirm that God is the all-knowing, all-powerful creator of the world who rules the universe. And those 6 propositions were some indication, at least, that you affirmed a biblical worldview. Well, how many Americans in the U.S. do you think would affirm all 6 of those propositions? In 2009, Barna found that it was 9% of the American population. Now, he broke this up into different subgroups. And of course, one of the subgroups that he broke this into was born-again Christians. Born-again Christians were defined as having made a personal commitment to Jesus Christ that is important in their life today, and that they're certain that they'll go to heaven after they die only because they confessed their sins and accepted Christ as their Savior. So these were seemed to be evangelical Christians like you and I, like people here at Harvest. How many evangelical Christians do you think would affirm all 6 of those statements? Well, Barna found that number was 19%. 19% of all evangelical Christians that they surveyed affirmed these 6 propositions. And again, now those, when you look at it, really it's a minimalistic view of Christianity. Those are our minimal views of a biblical worldview. And the conclusion was that not only has our culture lost a biblical worldview, but even in the church, you have a minority of people who affirm views that are clearly laid out in the Scripture. And so I just encourage you to look through that list and say, is there anything on that list that I do not affirm or that I have trouble with? It seems to me that we're in a little bit of trouble here. That if only 19% of the people in our churches affirm these things, affirm a biblical worldview, we're in trouble. But now this is a class where we're raising the bar. You guys are leadership material here. So let's raise the bar a little bit more for you. Because I would expect that probably the majority of you not only affirm those, but can maybe defend those and explain those. But let's go a little bit deeper. And here's what I want you to do. On your sheet of paper there, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to define the Trinity. Okay? Just take 2 or 3 sentences and give me an accurate definition of the Trinity. All right? The Trinity is an orthodox view. It's an essential view. So if say this is maybe one of your tests or one of your test questions, how would you define the Trinity? Take a couple minutes and do that on your sheet of paper there. Okay, take a few more seconds to do that. And what we're going to do is we're just going to move down the row here. We're going to have each person stand up, and I want you to read your definition. Why do you laugh? A little nervous laughter. I'm just curious. How many of you, that's the first time you've been asked to write out a definition of the Trinity? Anybody? First time? Okay. A number of you. First time you've been asked to give a clear definition of the Trinity. Okay. Does anyone want to take a shot and give us your definition? Yeah, right here. Okay, one God, eternally existent in 3 persons. Okay, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Okay. It's pretty good. Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. Now let me add a second part to this. Okay. Now here's what I want you to do. I want you to write out your biblical defense. Where in the world do you find the Trinity in Scripture? So if you can lay out the few verses in Scripture that mention the Trinity, I want you to do that. Okay. Ready, go. Okay, now, how many of you, just be honest, how many of you say, yeah, I struggle with that a little bit? Raise your hand if you struggle with that. Okay, thanks for your honesty. How do you think you would do if there was a knock at the door and 2 men were standing there in black slacks and white shirts, little name tag, Elder Kunkel. And they were from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and you invited them in, as every good Christian would. And they sat down and you started having conversations, and you got onto this topic of the Godhead and the Trinity and the differences between Mormonism and Christianity. How well do you think you would be able to defend your view? Let me just lay out a biblical view of the Trinity. If you did not have something like this, you might be a heretic, okay? Now, we won't burn you at the stake here, but you needed to have something like this in your definition, okay? Within the one being that is God, okay, here's the oneness of the Trinity. There's one God, one being who is God, all right? You don't want to say one person. If you said one person, you got it wrong. But there's one being. There simultaneously, that word is key, simultaneously. There simultaneously exists three co-equal and co-eternal and distinct persons. Key word, persons. Namely, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So you needed something like that. If you said three beings who are one being, that's a contradiction. If you said three persons who are one person, that's a contradiction. If you said three gods who are one God, that's a contradiction. And also they're heretical. Okay? But you would need to affirm that there is one God, but within that one being, there are three distinct persons. Those distinct persons exist simultaneously. They are co-eternal. You need something about the fact that these beings all exist simultaneously, and they have existed. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit have existed together from all eternity. This is the nature of God. He is a Trinitarian being. He has always been a Trinitarian being. If you gave the analogy of an egg, or the analogy of someone who is one human being, but they're a father, a son, and a husband, and play three different roles, that would be inadequate. Those would be different versions of heresies that the church rejected long, long ago. Now, I'm being a little hard on you, but I want you to see here, the definition of the Trinity is no small thing. We are talking about who God is. And it would be my contention that if you don't know much about the Trinity, then you don't know much about God himself, because God is by nature a Trinitarian being. And that the study of something like the doctrine of the Trinity is something that is essential for us as Christians to know, and is something that will deepen, indeed, our worship of God and our knowledge of him and our walk with him. This is an essential, but some of you have already affirmed that this is the first time many of you have even been asked to define it. And I would suggest that there may be many Christians in our midst who are walking around at our churches who really don't know a whole lot about God. Because God has not been taught to us as an area of knowledge that we ought to do much hard work and study in. We just come to church, and what we're supposed to do is we're just supposed to experience God. Right? It's not enough to know about God. We need to just know God. And this is what we hear again and again in our churches. Knowledge is not enough. You've got to have a real experience of Jesus. Look, our problem in our evangelical churches today is not that we have too much knowledge. Take this little quiz and go out next Sunday and go out here on the patio and just start surveying some people in your church here. Find out how many could define the Trinity accurately and could even offer a few verses and defend it from Scripture. We have lost our minds in the evangelical church. And that's why I think it's one of the reasons why the church is largely powerless against a secular wave in the culture. And it's why many of us don't experience the power of the Holy Spirit that is available to us in our own lives, in the transformation of our own lives. Now, I want to suggest that there are some major confusions that we have inherited, that have been passed down to us, that have led to this. When I was a freshman in college, I had to take Philosophy 101. That's where I met this man, Dr. David Lane. And I had grown up in the church, 18 years in the church, was a good Christian kid, was a leader in my youth group, was planning to go into youth ministry. And in my freshman year, had Philosophy 101 at a local junior college. And there, David Lane dismantled me in class. It became apparent that I was a Christian in this class, and he began to single me out in class and just dismantle certain aspects of Christianity. I would chase him down after a class, go to his office. I remember one time being in his office, he told me to take out my Bible. I took out my Bible. He said, I want to show you some things, Brett. He had me turn to the book of Matthew, turn to the end of Matthew, and he had me look at the resurrection account at the end of Matthew. He had me take out a piece of paper and a pen and write 3 columns. And at the first column I wrote Matthew, and he had me write down the details of the resurrection account. Then we turned to the book of Mark. We read the resurrection account in the book of Mark and wrote down the details. When we turned to the book of Luke, we wrote down the resurrection details in the book of Luke, and there he showed me on that sheet of paper the differences between Matthew, Mark, and Luke that he said were clear contradictions. I'd grown up in the church and never heard this before. And here it seemed the guy with the PhD, the smart guy, was showing me what no one in church was willing to show me. I remember walking out of his office with fear and trembling because I had no answers for him. And I remember the very first person that I went to was a man I respect and love, an elder in our church, a leader, a Sunday school teacher. And I started laying out the different challenges that my professor had been throwing down for me as a freshman in his Philosophy 101 class. And I asked this man, how do you answer these questions? How do you answer these challenges? And essentially what he said to me was, he said, Brett, I just have faith. I just have faith. How satisfying do you think that was to me as a college freshman who's getting hammered in class? It was not satisfying at all. And what he communicated in that response was a particular view of faith. It's a view of faith that is largely held in our evangelical churches. And there are 2 confusions that I want to clear up today. And the first one is I want to clear up confusions that we have about faith. And then we'll move on to confusions that we have about knowledge that really undermine our ability to think clearly about God. Now, here's what I want you to do on your sheet of paper. I want you to define faith. Define faith. Write down your definition of faith. What is faith? Okay, hopefully you got a definition down there. Now, let's look to some different voices to get some different views out there in the world about faith. What is faith? Well, this first definition comes from a movie, an old classic, Miracle on 34th Street.
You couldn't get it because you're not Santa Claus, that's why. You're just a nice old man with whiskers, like my mother said. And I should...
Maybe we can get some audio. We'll try that again. We'll give the audio guy another chance.
You couldn't get it because you're not Santa Claus, that's why. You're just a nice old man with whiskers, like my mother said. And I shouldn't have believed you.
Just believe in Mr. Kringle and keep right on doing it. You must have faith in him.
But he didn't get me That doesn't
all right,
make
well, while we
sense,
try to work out
Mommy.
the technical difficulties here,
Faith is
how many of you are
believing in
familiar with the
things when common
scene?
sense tells you not to.
Okay, you familiar with the scene where the little girl says, she's struggling with this whole idea of belief in Santa Claus, and mom says, no, we should believe, and she's like, well, what do you mean, we should believe? And mom's like, we should have faith. The little girl says, that doesn't make sense. And the mom then goes on to define faith. She says, faith is believing in something when common sense tells you not to. Very interesting. I mean, I think this movie's 40s? Interesting view of faith. Where does this view come from? Faith is believing in something when common sense tells you not to. So this is one of the views you hear out there in the culture. This guy here is Sam Harris, one of the new atheists, an aggressive atheist who's written a number of books. Listen to how he defines faith. He says faith is generally nothing more than the permission religious people give one another to believe things strongly without evidence. To believe things strongly without evidence. Now, we might expect this from an atheist, that an atheist would have this view. In fact, when you talk to an atheist, one of the very first things you want to do is define your terms. And so when they talk about faith, if they offer this definition of faith, I want to say, no, I don't think that's the right view. But not only do we see these views coming from outside of the church, we also see them in the church. Here's a recent book by John Wilkinson called No Argument for God. Notice the subtitle, Going Beyond Reason in Conversations About Faith. Now listen to what he says about faith. He says the Christian message in all its bizarre glory comes from across the sea, beyond the horizon. We heard it from someone else, who heard it from someone else, who heard it from the person who saw it all. The only thing different about the people of faith is that they choose to believe the testimony handed down to them. The only thing they have is faith, which is absurd, but that's okay. And all of the things that come with it, prayer, worship, charity, sacrificial love, all of it too is nonsense. This is a Christian author. He's a leader in a church. He's a youth pastor, I believe. And he writes this book with a major Christian publisher, where he says faith fundamentally is absurd. It doesn't make sense. And we really don't have any arguments that can get us to belief in God. Faith fundamentally is an absurd leap. And there is this dichotomy that exists, not only in the view of people in our culture out there, but even within the church, that on one side you have faith. But on the other side, you have things like reason and knowledge. And there's this war between the two. And there are many Christians who buy this view of faith. And so for them, faith is a blind leap. Right? Faith is nothing more at the end of the day than wishful thinking. It's hope beyond hope. That's what we talk about it as a leap of faith. Right? We have to leap. We have to set aside logic. We have to set aside rationality. We have to set aside evidence. We have to set aside science. We set all that stuff aside, and then what do? We jump with the power of faith to just believe these absurd things. That is the definition of faith that many Christians hold. And that view of faith will short-circuit your faith. It will short-circuit your faith. I want to go through a little bit of the result of this. And I want you to see how this gets played out, not only in our own lives, but also in the culture. The result of this view of faith is that it makes faith ultimately irrelevant. This book here, Soul Searching, is a major study that was undertaken by sociologist Christian Smith when he was at the University of North Carolina. He's now at the university, or he's at Notre Dame University. And it was part of the National Study of Youth and Religion, a major study. And in 2005, he released these results. What they did was his team of researchers went around the country and tried to do a very comprehensive study on these religious and spiritual lives of American teenagers. What do our young people believe about faith and about God and their religious views? And one of the key things they found, maybe you've heard the term, they said basically American teenagers, we can kind of capture the faith of the typical American teenager really across the board, across religious lines, as moralistic therapeutic deism. Moralistic therapeutic deism. It's the idea that there is a God out there. He exists basically for your happiness. He wants you to be good, but beyond that, he's not too involved in your life. In fact, one of the things that the researchers observed is that after talking to students, they found that God, religion, faith was mostly situated in the background of everyday living. So God was kind of in the background of life. Monday through Friday, I go to school, and I study certain subjects. God's not there. I don't bring him out there. I bring him out when I'm doing my personal devotions in the morning. Or I bring him out when I go to church, youth group on Wednesday night, or if I go to church on Sunday. That's when God comes out. But otherwise, he's situated mostly in the background of everyday living. Now, I don't think this is unique to young people. I think this is how many Christians live their life. God ends up being in the background of everyday living. Think about it. Maybe just do a little inventory of your own life. Think about tomorrow, Monday, when maybe you go back to work, you go back to your job, you go back to school. I want you to think, how is God at the forefront of all that you will say and do and think and act tomorrow? When you go to work, what considerations of God do you have? When you go to school, how close is God to the tip of your tongue, or to the thoughts in your mind? Or as you go through your life, how many of us would admit that, you know what? Yeah, in a lot of my life, God is situated in the background of everyday living. Now, our view of faith is divorced from reason and knowledge and evidence and these kinds of things, is resulted in this. It's what the apologist Francis Schaeffer called a two-story house. I think this is an analogy that will help maybe flesh this out a little bit for you and me, okay? I'm going to use this analogy of this two-story house as a way for you to see how we as a culture think, how Western civilization now thinks. Okay, so this is the mindset of most people in our culture, is that we live in this two-story house. It's what some people call the sacred secular split, or the public-private split. So imagine the thinking is like a two-story house. You have 2 floors, all right? You've got 2 floors. On the bottom floor of the house, you have the objective floor. This is the public floor, or the secular floor. This is where we deal with, this is also called the fact-value dichotomy. This is where you deal with facts. The objective floor is where you deal with facts. This is where you're able to gain knowledge. This is where you do things like science, right? Science gives us knowledge. And so in that bottom floor, science, that's the arena of things like science, maybe law, politics, medicine, right? In areas where we can know facts and we can know truth and we can have knowledge, these are in that objective floor. All right, but there's a second part of life, a second compartment of life, right? And this is how we compartmentalize our lives. We have this upper story called the subjective floor. It's the private floor. This is not where we're dealing with publicly accessible facts. This is where we're dealing with, not with knowledge, but with preferences. These are our personal preferences. So what kind of things go up in that upper floor? Well, things like family traditions, right? We just got done celebrating Christmas. All of us have different family traditions during Christmas time. Now, we wouldn't say that our family traditions are traditions that everyone should practice. So maybe you set up a tree, or maybe you put up Christmas lights, but would you argue that those traditions are things that everyone ought to do? Well, of course not. You've got your family tradition. Maybe you cook a ham on Christmas Day. Someone else cooks a prime rib roast. Those are merely preferences, aren't they? And so that's up in that subjective floor. We'd say those are subjective preferences. All right? And so family traditions go up in that area. But what else does our culture put up in that subjective floor? Religion. Religion, that's not an objective thing. You can't get knowledge from religion. You have preferences in religion, and so that goes up in your religion goes up in that subjective floor. Morality. Right? Well, you've got your personal, private moral views, But you can't impose those moral views on other people. And so where do those go? Well, those are subjective. You have subjective, private moral views, and that's okay. You can have those. Just don't try to take your religious views, your moral views, and impose those on other people, right? You can't push that on other people because those aren't facts. Those are only preferences. See, this is how our culture thinks. And there's this divide between those two floors. And so to get to that upper floor, you've got to take a leap of faith, right? Because you can't have knowledge about it. Science can't tell you whether or not God exists. You've got to have faith. And so you take a leap to that subjective, privatized upper floor. Now, do you see how, if our culture thinks this way, if we think this way, do you see what it does? It cordons off our religious views, our views about God, our faith, from what? So much of our lives, doesn't it? If faith only belongs up there, and I'm not supposed to bring it down into the bottom floor, it's a whole different realm. Well, guess what? I've effectively sealed it off from so many areas of my life. And so let's say I'm a nurse or a doctor, and I go into the hospital. When I go into the hospital, I'm dealing on what floor? The objective floor, right? I'm giving people knowledge about their diseases and their sicknesses, and I'm giving them facts. But am I ever supposed to bring in faith into that hospital? No, because that's subjective, that's private, that's not fact, that's preference. Remember those two words, knowledge and preference. And you see, this paradigm effectively cuts our religious views off from so much of our lives. So think about the typical high school student or college student who is going to school Monday through Friday, and they are studying all kinds of different subjects, from chemistry to biology to anthropology to geography, world civilization, mathematics, whatever their major might be. When they go to the university Monday through Friday, are they supposed to bring in faith? No, when you go to the university, you don't want faith, you don't want preferences, you want facts. And so no wonder so many Christians who hold this view, who have bought into this view, no wonder God is in the background of their everyday living. He's been cut off from every important area of their lives. And so what this does is it makes God largely irrelevant to our lives. Many of us could simply live as atheists if we took out church and, Wednesday night Bible study. And so for us, so what this does is it diffuses. No wonder Jesus seems so irrelevant to many young people, because he has nothing to do with all the stuff that they're doing Monday through Friday in their regular lives and what they're studying and what they're going to do for the rest of their life. Do you see that? Are you with me? Do you see how that if you kind of get this paradigm, I think it'll help unlock a lot for you. It'll help you to see how our culture thinks. Now, I want to explore this a little bit more because I want you to see how this paradigm, this is the dominant view in our culture about faith. I want you to see how then this marginalizes our influence in the culture, okay? Now, do we get audio on the? Okay, hopefully we have some audio because I've got a couple clips that are key. But how on this view, if this is the view of the culture, this two-story house, how do you delegitimize Christianity? Well, maybe you're familiar with this gentleman, and if you watch the old Star Wars movies, Christopher Reeve, right? He played in the first 4 Star Wars, not Star Wars. Yeah, see, that's the medication. Superman. All right, I knew there was flying stuff in there. All right, Superman. But he had a tragic accident, horse riding accident. Became was it quadriplegic or paraplegic? Quadriplegic. And he became a big advocate for embryo stem cell research. Now, he was before a student group at Yale University talking about public policy. Notice what he says. He says, when matters of public policy are debated, no religions should have a seat at the table. Now notice what he's doing. Now, has he argued against religion? He hasn't argued against any specific views about religion. What is he doing? He's taking religion and he's pushing it into the upper story. Notice, if this is the view of our culture, they think in terms of a 2-story house, you don't have to argue against Christianity. You don't have to argue against any religion. All you have to do is push it into the category of subjective. All you got to do is say it's faith. It's a private, personal thing. And you put it in that upper realm and you delegitimize it. It's faith, so therefore it should have no seat at the table as we discuss public policy, you see. Now, I'm going to show you a clip here, a video clip from the last vice presidential debate between Joe Biden and Paul Ryan. And I want you to listen to the question. The question is going to be about the role of religion in public policy. And I want you to listen carefully to the answer.
This debate is indeed historic. We have 2 Catholic candidates, first time on a stage such as this. And I would like to ask you both to tell me what role your religion has played in your own personal views on abortion. Please talk about how you came to that decision. Talk about how your religion played a part in that.
My religion defines who I am. And I've been a practicing Catholic my whole life. And it has particularly informed my social doctrine. Catholic social doctrine talks about taking care of those who can't take care of themselves, people who need help. With regard to abortion, I accept my church's position on abortion as what we call de fide doctrine. Life begins at conception. That's the church's judgment. I accept it in my personal life. But I refuse to impose it on equally devout Christians and Muslims and Jews. And I just refuse to impose that on others, unlike my friend here, the congressman. I do not believe that we have a right to tell other people that women, they can't control their body. It's a decision between them and their doctor, in my view. In the Supreme Court, I'm not going to interfere with that.
Okay, do you see the 2-story split? Right there. Now, let's rehearse kind of what he said here. Joe Biden says, I don't care what end of the political spectrum you're on. Let's just analyze what he's saying about religion here. He's got his comment at the beginning of that little segment was, my faith defines me, right? Well, how does it define you? Well, it defines me personally, right? And so I buy into the Catholic Church's view that life begins at conception. That's what I buy into in my personal life, my life of faith, right? But notice, what floor does that belong in? That's the upper floor. That's the floor of faith. That's subjective. That's the subjective realm. And so even though I have these deeply held personal views that life begins in conception and my faith informs me about that, I can't do what? I can't bring that into the bottom floor and impose it on other people, right? That's the view. Because that's faith. So notice, you don't have to argue against faith. All you have to do is say it's faith. All you have to do is push it up into that upper floor and you can make it illegitimate in public discourse. Do you see how that neuters Christianity? How that takes our views and says, no, your views are private. They can stay in churches like this, but you can't bring them out into the rest of society and impose them on other people. Now, think about that. What's it mean? What's it mean to have a deeply held personal view that life begins at conception? Well, if that's the case, if it's your view that life begins at conception, then abortion would be the taking of that life, even if you're going to say that's personal. So if that's the taking of an innocent life, and you think that personally, what are you saying? You're saying, well, I think it's essentially murder, but I can't impose that on other people. Now, do we have laws that impose restrictions on people for murder? Yes. In fact, it's important for you to know that every law is the imposing of someone's view. Every law is the imposing of somebody's moral view. But notice what's happened in public discourse here is we've been able to say, hey, if you're a Christian, you can have your views, but you can't impose those on anyone else because that's faith. That's faith. Now, a very different answer from Paul Ryan.
I don't see how a person can separate their public life from their private life or from their faith. Our faith informs us in everything we do. My faith informs me about how to take care of the vulnerable, about how to make sure that people have a chance in life. Now, you want to ask basically why I'm pro-life? It's not simply because of my Catholic faith. That's a factor, of course. But it's also because of reason and science.
Okay. I like that man. Because I think he's a good thinker. No divide. He doesn't have this public-private split, does he? He said, I don't know how your faith can't inform everything. There's no split here for him. Now, but notice, it's not just, well, it's simply my church teaches, therefore, but notice he brought in a couple other things. Reason and science. He doesn't see faith on one side and reason and science on the other, but he brings those together. And that is the biblical view. That's the biblical view. Now, this is an important discussion because the conversation in the culture is even shifting further. You've got atheists like Richard Dawkins who says something like this. He says, faith is one of the world's great evils, comparable to the smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate. It is capable of driving people to such dangerous folly that faith seems to me to qualify as a kind of mental illness. All right. Now, is that just some radical atheist spouting off? Well, I don't think so. And as I've watched the culture, I'm noticing that Christians are no longer just called intolerant when they begin to take their views out there in public. Guys like Paul Ryan or Christians who go out into the public square and try and make their case. Okay? They're no longer just called intolerant, but there's another word that's being used. Now, I want you to watch this clip. This is a Britt Hume. He's a news analyst. And a couple years ago, he made some comments about Tiger Woods when Tiger Woods was going through all that trouble. I want you to listen carefully to his comments.
Tiger Woods will recover as a golfer. Whether he can recover as a person, I think is a very open question, and it's a tragic situation with him. I think he's lost his family. It's not clear to me that whether he'll be able to have a relationship with his children. But the Tiger Woods that emerges once the news value dies out of this scandal, the extent to which he can recover, it seems to me, depends on his faith. He's said to be a Buddhist. I don't think that faith offers the kind of forgiveness and redemption that is offered by the Christian faith. So my message to Tiger would be, Tiger, turn to the Christian faith, and you can make a total recovery and be a great example to the world.
Uh-oh. Britt Hume just made a big no-no. You don't do this. What did Britt Hume do? He tried to take the Christian faith and bring it out of that upper floor and tried to bring it down, and he actually compared religions. And he suggested that Christianity is better and superior than Buddhism. Oh, man. Wrong thing to do in our culture, isn't it? And the response was predictable. Eric Deegans wrote this in the St. Petersburg Times. Notice what he says. He says, I was so dismayed to see Fox News Channel pundit analyst Britt Hume encouraging Tiger Woods to turn to Christianity instead of Buddhism for spiritual healing on a news show ostensibly devoted to politics. Right? Because notice, you don't want to want to mix these things. Don't mix religion and politics. Better voices than mine have already deconstructed how such exhortations are serious examples of religious intolerance and smack of the kind of spiritual superiority fueling the terrorism we are struggling to contain in other parts of the world. Now, what's the parallel that's being drawn? It's not just religious intolerance, but there's a parallel drawn with terrorism. And see, Christians are no longer being called just intolerant, but they're being called dangerous. And so if you take your faith so seriously that you want to try and bring it into the public realm, you think your view is true, you think your faith is true over and against all these other religions, well, then you're not just an intolerant person, but you're potentially dangerous, because that's what terrorists do. You see how this stuff plays out in the culture? And if you can say this loud enough and with enough force, and you can win enough hearts and minds with this view, you can marginalize faith, can't you? And you can keep it out of the public realm. That's why it's so important for us to think carefully about these issues. Because these are not just abstract intellectual ideas. Eventually, these ideas get played out in our culture and in our very own lives. Ideas have consequences. They have serious consequences. Now, let me pause. I want to get into a correct view of faith, but I want to pause and see, at this point, are there any questions, comments, thoughts? Yes. You're going to have to speak a little bit louder for me. Oh, yeah. Okay, you said this way of thinking is...
You can do it.
I can't. Okay. When the Antichrist and all that, in Revelations, how we are going to be, beheaded, or people are going to be really hating the Christians, and this is, I think, maybe the beginning of that train of thought. I
don't know if this is any indication of end times. I think there are going to be different views on end times things, but certainly I think we would say that this poses a very big challenge to Christians in Western culture now. So yeah, thank you. Other thoughts, comments, right back there.
This article here really strikes me when he compares him taking his Christianity out into the world to terrorism, and them doing that in other parts of the nation, and it does lead to terrorism. How would you argue the difference in his bringing his Christian ideal to the news table versus what the people in other countries and their religion are doing? How would you argue that? Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of work we're going to have to do on this. So let me just make a few comments that may be instructive. I think number one of the very first things you want to do is you want to ask for definitions. So the first thing I'm going to ask is, okay, what do you mean by religious intolerance? Tell me, define that for me. What does it mean to be religiously intolerant? And typically when you ask for a definition of intolerance in contemporary culture, they're going to say something like this: well, you think you're right and everyone else is wrong, right? So and that seems to be what's going on here. The Christian thinks he's right, he thinks the Buddhist is wrong. That's intolerance. So now notice the definition. Now I have got some material to work with here. Intolerance means you think you're right and everyone else is wrong. But now notice, the person is offering a correction to you, aren't they? Eric Deegans is offering a correction to Tiger Woods. So my question then is, does Eric Deegans does he think his view is right, and does he think Britt Hume is wrong? He does, doesn't he? Eric Deegans thinks his view is right, and he thinks Britt Hume is wrong. That's why he's correcting him here in a public newspaper. So what's going on here? Because that's his view of it. That's his definition of intolerance. You think you're right and everyone else is wrong. So does Eric Deegan think he's right? Yes. Does he think Britt Hume is wrong? Yes. So on that very definition, he's intolerant as well. Well, why is it that when he thinks he's right, he's just right, and when I think I'm right, I'm intolerant? That's not fair, is it? And notice his definition is hopelessly confused. It's undergirded by a view of truth called relativism. All truth is relative when it comes to religion and morality. So I want to, number one, ask for some definition here, and then show him that he's doing the very same thing he's complaining about. That under his own definition of intolerance, he's intolerant. But that's a hopelessly confused definition of tolerance. And what we want to say is, look, everyone has a point of view. Everyone has a view of reality, whether you want to call it religious or not. Everyone has views about reality that they take to be true. And the question is, which views are true? And we'll talk a little bit more about truth later on. But I think that's we've got to be able to engage on that kind of level. And these are the kind of personal conversations we should be having, because you start talking about religion and morality with your coworker or your neighbor or your family member. These are the charges that you're going to get. You're intolerant. This stuff is dangerous. Yeah. So that's how we're going to have to interact with it. One more question. Anyone have a question? Okay, we'll go right there. Yeah, what do we do with Christians who perpetuate this view of faith? Probably burn them, I would guess. No, I think what we have to do is we have to lovingly and graciously offer a correction. I think we have to do what we're doing here. I think we got to go on the offensive, and I think classes like this, we need to have more of them. I think this kind of material needs to be talked about from the pulpit. I think our senior pastors need to have these views and then disseminate these views to the rest of the congregation. I think we need to develop a culture in our churches where this is normal Christianity, where we don't talk about it in these terms, where we've educated our people with the proper view of faith. And from the very beginning, from childhood, that we are infecting our children with this view of faith. This is what I'm doing with my own kids. I'm telling them about the other views out there. And I've exposed them to atheists and to Mormons and to other people who don't believe what we believe. Because I want my kids, the 5 kids that I've been entrusted with in my own family, to be able to go into the world and not be afraid of the culture and the bad ideas, but to be able to engage them intelligently. So I think maybe the starting point is in our churches to start just re-educating our people. And so what we need to do is we need to return to a proper view of faith, a biblical view of faith. If you have a Bible, you can turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. I want you to notice that this is not the view of faith that we find in the Scriptures. And I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a biblical argument here and try and kind of help redefine faith biblically. Biblical faith is not blind. And you'll notice in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul does not offer us blind faith. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. For those pagans that didn't bring their Bible, just look on with someone next to you. I'm just kidding. You're backslidden, but you're not a pagan. Okay, 1 Corinthians 15. Look in starting in verse 12. Paul here is talking about the resurrection of Jesus. And notice in verses 3 through 8, he gives us evidence of the resurrection. He lists eyewitnesses to the resurrection. Okay, this is some really important material that goes back very, very early, very close to the resurrection. So we have eyewitnesses, but notice what he says in verse 12, okay, arguing against the idea that there is no resurrection. He says, now if Christ is preached that he has been raised from the dead, how does some among you say there is no resurrection of the dead? But if there is no resurrection of the dead, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is vain. Your faith also is vain. Moreover, we are even found to be false witnesses of God because we have testified against God that he raised Christ, whom he did not raise, if in fact the dead are not raised. For if the dead are not raised, not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is worthless. You are still in your sins. Verse 19, if we have hoped in Christ in this life only, we are of all men most to be pitied. Notice what Paul does. He doesn't separate faith from fact. He doesn't separate faith from the evidence. What he does is he brings those two things together. And he says our faith is locked together with the facts. If it is indeed true that Jesus did not rise bodily from the grave, your faith is worthless. Faith that is not connected to facts, the facts of reality, is worthless. Paul doesn't say, well, just believe. Paul does not give the advice that I got from that well-meaning Christian when I was struggling with doubts about my faith. And I was told, you just got to have faith. Paul doesn't say that. Paul says that this stuff is not true. Your faith and my faith is worthless. Think about it. If there was a church down the road here, and every Sunday morning, let's say you go visit one Sunday morning, you go there and there's a worship band that gets up on that Sunday morning, and they play these songs, and you start listening to the lyrics, and you notice they're singing worship songs about a little boy who wears a green suit and who flies in the air and who sprinkles pixie dust on people. And then a pastor gets up after the worship band gets down, and he gets up and he opens up a book and he reads from this holy book. And he talks about the example that this young boy is. But you notice the book is not any sacred scripture, it's Peter Pan. How many of you would go back to that? How many of you would make that your home church? You wouldn't go back, except maybe out of interest, you might say, okay, well, what are these crazy people doing? But you would not go there and participate in the life of that church. You would not put your faith in the views of that church. Why? Because Peter Pan is mythology. It's not true. It doesn't match up with reality. It's a fairy tale. And you don't put your faith in a fairy tale. That kind of faith is worthless. And you would feel pity on those people if they went there every Sunday giving their life to Peter Pan and worshiping Peter Pan, worshiping a fairy tale. Right? And Paul says the same thing. If Jesus is a fairy tale, if the resurrection didn't happen, then we are of all men most to be pitied. You see, this view that faith and facts and faith and evidence are in separate ends of the spectrum is foreign to the scriptures. Notice Paul's custom in Acts chapter 17. In Acts 17, it says, and according to Paul's custom, he went to them and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and giving evidence that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead. So Paul, as he's going in to proclaim the good news, he's offering evidence for Jesus. Right? Notice this is according to his custom. This is what Paul regularly did. And if you go on and continue reading in verse 4, notice the result in verse 4. It says, and some were persuaded. People were persuaded to faith by reason and evidence. Again, you don't see this divide between logic and science and knowledge and evidence and faith. And you will never see in the scriptures faith pitted against evidence or knowledge or logic or science. The Bible never, ever does that. The only thing that you see faith pitted against is sight. And so what we've got a term, faith, that carries with it a lot of baggage. When we say faith, people in the culture, they hear blind leap, right? I mean, we see the examples in the culture. Blind leap. And so I think it would be maybe wise for us to take the term faith and set it aside, because it typically means some kind of blind leap, some anti-intellectual kind of deal. And what we need to do is we need to take faith and replace it with the word trust. Trust communicates the biblical view of faith. You see, faith biblically is trust. It's trust. That's what Scripture means when it uses the word faith. To believe in Jesus in the New Testament means to put your faith or your trust in Him. And now notice on this view, see, sometimes when we talk about faith, we think, oh yeah, that's what we do in religion. That's kind of in the religious realm. And so religious people have faith. Of atheists, they don't have faith. But religious people have faith because that's a religious term. But notice trust moves that and says, no, okay, it's not just a religious term. Trust is something that you exercise every day of your life, isn't it? When you think about trust, you are exercising trust almost every moment of your life. Right now, you are trusting. You're trusting, number one, that chair is going to hold you up, right? Now, I didn't see anybody get down on their hands and knees and inspect their chair before they sat down. No, you've got some probably background evidence, some good reasons why you think that chair is going to hold you. You take a quick glance at it. You notice it's got 4 legs or whatever, and you sit down in it. It's held you up before. Chairs in this church are reasonably sturdy. Whatever the evidence might be, and you put your faith. Now, you didn't have absolute assurance. You didn't have absolute certainty that chair was going to hold you. Even now, we have faith that this roof is not going to collapse in on us, right? We don't know for certain that it's not going to happen, but we're exercising trust just sitting in this room. We're exercising faith. And so notice on that view, everybody has faith, don't they? Now think about it. I've been married to my wife. There's my wife and kids. I've been married to my wife now for 15 years. When was my faith or my trust in my wife strongest? Was it strongest when after a year and a half of dating we got engaged and got married after 2 years of knowing each other? Or is it stronger now? Are you sure? Now you hope so, but you're not sure whether or not my faith or my trust in her is stronger now than it was, 15 years ago. What would it depend upon? My trust in my wife is dependent upon my knowledge of her, isn't it? It's dependent upon the evidence I've gained about this woman. And so maybe for the first year and a half or 2 years, she just she had me blinded by love. And I wasn't able to see any of her flaws, and she put on this great front, and I took her to be this great woman, but then we get married. And through the months and the years, I start to gain knowledge about her, and I realize, oh my gosh, she's lies to me all the time. She says she's going to be here, and she's not there, and I catch her in lies, and there's money missing from our bank account all the time, and there's no explanation for it, and she's not sacrificial at all. She's selfish, and I start gaining knowledge and evidence about her character. What does that do to my faith or my trust in her? It weakens it. And so if that were the case, if I've had 15 years of discovering poor character in this woman, then my faith would be much weaker in her. Thankfully, she's a great woman. I've never caught her in a lie. She's been completely loyal and honest and sacrificial. And so what I've done over 15 years now is I have gained evidence or knowledge of this woman and of who she is and her character. And you know what that's done to my faith? It's made my faith or my trust in her so much stronger. All this evidence undergirds my trust. So that now when I go and speak in other parts of the country, I'm not worried. I'm not worried about what's going on at home because I have such evidence that builds up my trust in her. Notice the connection between your knowledge and your evidence and your reasons and faith. Those things go together. And then we see this in Scripture. Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. See, we put our faith in things that are unseen. God is spirit. He can't be seen. He's unseen. Now, does that mean it's irrational or absurd? No, because we have evidence for the unseen world. And what gives us assurance? What would give us assurance of these things? Well, the evidence. Think about it. Say you want to go down to the, there's a Mega Million lottery that's, $300 million, and you want to go play, right? Because you can't win if you don't play. So you go play, you buy your lottery ticket. Now, when you buy that lottery ticket and you pick your numbers, do you have any assurance that you're going to win? No, you got no assurance. You have hope, right? We might say you have blind faith if you think you're going to win. Yeah, the odds are against you. But what if you had the ability to know the future? What if you knew which numbers were going to come up? You had that knowledge, and that those are the numbers that you chose. Would you have assurance then, after you bought that ticket, that you were going to win? Yeah, so what's the difference? Your knowledge, right? It's your knowledge that turns that faith into assurance. And we can have that kind of assurance of the unseen world. This is the biblical view of faith. You look at Jesus, and all the time, you see him demonstrating, him giving evidence, often in the form of miracles, right? So you look at a passage like Mark 2, the paralytic. And Jesus says, in order that you may know, not only does he forgive the sins, he says, your sins are forgiven, right? A spiritual reality. But in order that you may know, what does he do? He heals him. And he offers evidence. He offers evidence. And so all throughout Scripture, we have this connection between our faith and our knowledge or our evidence or our justification. And that is the biblical view of faith. So faith, properly defined, biblically defined, is trusting in what you have good reason to believe is true. Faith is trusting in what you have good reason to believe is true. That is the biblical view of faith. And so what we want to do is we want to get rid of this paradigm that many Christians have, that it's faith on one side and reason on the other. Instead, we want to replace it with a view that faith is a reasonable thing, that faith is not anti-intellectual. Now, of course, it doesn't just stay up there in the realm of the abstract. Of course, if I have faith in my wife, that's going to result in an act of trust. I'm going to act upon that trust. My faith is not a static thing. But if I say, yes, I have faith in you, honey, I want to give my life to you, I think you're a good woman I can spend the rest of my life with, well, that faith is going to be carried out in action, right? I'm going to walk down that aisle. And then there's going to be certain actions that follow that verify that faith. And that's why, on this view of faith, faith is trust. You could have Norm Geisler and Frank Turk write a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Because on this view, atheism, the atheist puts his trust in something. Everybody puts their trust in something. Everybody has a view of faith. In fact, Richard Dawkins has faith. Listen to this video clip where Richard Dawkins says that he has faith.
Not in the sense of faith as meaning belief in something for which there is no evidence. There are various senses of faith in which scientists do participate. Those branches of science which I don't understand, for example, physics, it could be said, I suppose, that I have faith that physicists understand it better than I do. And so when I say something that physicists tell me, such as that there was nothing before the Big Bang. You're not allowed to talk about the word before in the context of the Big Bang. I sort of have faith that physicists understand enough to be allowed to say that, even though I don't understand why they're allowed to say that. But it's not faith, it's not blind faith, it's not faith in the absence of evidence. It's faith that's based upon confidence in the scientific method, in the scientific peer review process, the fact that I know that there are other physicists who can test, verify, criticize the views of any one physicist. So it's not the same as religious faith, which is based upon no evidence at all.
Okay. And so I would simply want to say, Richard Dawkins, I reject that view of religious faith. I disagree. Religious faith is not the view that you believe something without evidence. I hold your view of faith. Faith as confidence. Faith is connected to reason and science and knowledge. Faith is trusting in what you have good reason to believe is true. And so everybody on this view has faith. The key question is, what is the object of your faith, right? It's not, faith doesn't save us. It's faith in a particular person that saves us. And the question is the object of your faith able to do what you are trusting it to do? And so for atheism, you've got faith in things. You've got faith that something comes from nothing, or that life comes from non-life, that consciousness comes from matter, that morality arises from some rearrangement of molecules. I do not have enough faith to be an atheist. For the theist, we have faith. We certainly do. That beginnings have beginners. The design comes from a designer. Mind is the result of intelligence. Moral laws come from moral lawgivers. I think it is more reasonable to put my faith in that. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And so the question then is, okay, what are you putting your faith in? And that leads us to our second main confusion about knowledge. But before we go into that, I want to take a pause here. See, are there any questions right now? Any questions about anything that we've covered so far? Nobody? Oh, question here.
When you went to your teacher, you told about the 3 different seasons of Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
Yeah.
And you went to your pastor and explained. How did you resolve that? Did you search deeper?
Yeah. Oh yeah, thankfully there were some men and women who helped me out on that, and I discovered. The question was when I was challenged by my professor about the contradictions, and he kind of dismantled my Christianity, and I went to the church leader and didn't get any help there. Well, how did I resolve that? Well, yeah, thankfully there were men and women who knew some answers, and who helped me and who introduced me to apologetics. And apologetics really saved my faith at that point and helped me see that there were good reasons to believe what we believe. And so I looked into something like the nature of eyewitness evidence, and looking at the nature of these ancient accounts and looking more closely at the fact that you don't have real contradictions. You have different accounts with different details, which is what you should expect in genuine eyewitness accounts. In fact, if we took 4 of you after this session and we had you go outside and we had you write down a 2-page account of what happened in here, guess what? We'd find discrepancies. They'd be what we might call apparent contradictions, right? And so someone might say, I was surprised. The room was filled with 122 men or something like that. Someone might come and say, well, are you saying there were no women? Well, if I say there are 122 men in here, does it necessarily mean that there are no women in here? No, for whatever reason, I might be just emphasizing, hey, we're excited because we want to try and get more men involved in ministry or whatever. And so for my purposes, for why I'm writing, I may include that detail. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a contradiction from someone who say, hey, altogether there were 300 men and women. Right? Those are apparent contradictions. They're not real. And so these are the kinds of things that I discovered that we have good answers for these kinds of challenges. And apologetics is one thing we'll look at here at the end, is one thing that really helped me in that whole process. Yeah, good question. One more question right here. Yeah, if everybody has faith, how about the agnostic? The agnostic who says, well, I don't know. I mean, if you're a genuine agnostic, you're going to say, I don't know about these things. I don't know, and I don't know if we could know. Well, you're still putting your faith in something. You're putting your faith in that answer that you don't know and that there's not going to be any consequences to it, right? Because you can say all your life, well, I don't know, and you're trusting that that's going to be good enough at the end of life. And you're trusting that the Christian is hopefully wrong, that when you die, there's one of two destinations for your soul. And so you're still putting your trust in something. And kind of maybe by default, you're trusting that your ignorance is enough. So everyone is trusting in something. Yeah. Even the agnostic. Yeah. All right, let's do this. I'm going to do this to my peril. I'm going to give you a little stretch break here. But if you don't have to go anywhere, don't leave your seat. You can just stand up, stretch around. Maybe you get a little massage from the person next to you. All right? If you have to use a restroom, feel free to do that. If you are a backslidden Christian and want to leave, go ahead. You can do, no, I know some of you might have ministry commitments, but take a quick break, and I'm going to start in literally 2 minutes.
All right, I just want to give some clarity on a few things. If you are taking the certificate track and you want to get the certificate at the end of the year, you need to write on that sign-up sheet every week your name and whether you've done your reading. Now, if you don't have your books yet and you're taking the certificate track because they're not in, then simply put in that sign-up sheet, books on order, or BO. That doesn't mean you smell. It means your books are on order. If you're like, but I already signed in and I can't find where I signed my name at, just send me an email at daniel@harvest.org and let me know what you've done and that you weren't able to do the rest because the books are in, and we'll give an exception to that. So is that clear? If you are taking the certificate track and you have not registered, see me afterwards so I can register you. Unfortunately, that sign-up sheet that you may have signed doesn't have your email address, and we're going to be communicating with you via email a lot, so I need your email address. So if you have not registered either online or Sunday on the patio, come see me after class and we'll get you registered. And if you're not sure, just come see me and double check. So I'll be at the table, my right-hand side, your left, in the back there. Finally, I don't want to take up too much of Brett's time. In the syllabus, I believe it says that your test will be the final Sunday in January. Here's the problem. We have class on the final Sunday of January, and you need to be tested on that. So for those of you taking the certificate track, which requires you taking the test, we will have the test the following Sunday, which I believe is Sunday, February 4th, 2 o'clock here in the loft. 2 o'clock here in the loft. That gives you an extra week to study all the material, so you'll do better. And if for some unforeseen reason that doesn't work out for you, simply contact me via email, daniel@harvest.org, and we will figure out an alternate time and place for you to take that test, okay? Finally, if you're taking the certificate track and you can't make one of the classes, contact me again. You can get the class on DVD, and we'll have a makeup assignment for you to do to show that you watched the video. Okay? Any other questions about that? If what I said isn't clear, just come see me. I'll give you clarifying answers, and I'll work with you, okay? With no further ado, Brett Kunkel.
If someone asks you, what does it look like to love God? How would you answer them? Think about that. Answer them in your mind right now. Someone says, okay, what? You say you love God. What does that mean? What does that include? What does that encompass? What's that entail? What does it mean to love God? What pictures or images come to your mind when you think about the person who loves God? What does it mean to love God? I would suggest in our churches, in Western culture, many of us, when we think about loving God, will run to images like this. You know, the person who really loves God, who's passionately in love with God, is raising their hands in worship. Or maybe they're in passionate prayer. And oftentimes when we talk about loving God, we connect it to the emotions or the affections. And certainly, there is an important place for the affections or the emotions in our love for God. But many of us define love now entirely in terms of the emotions. And think about just the messages about love in our culture. Just think about marital love. Phrases like falling in and out of love. What does that communicate about the nature of love? Right? And love, I think, is misunderstood, and particularly when it comes to loving God. For many of us, loving God simply amounts to having emotional experiences with God. And as important as it is, that is not the whole picture. And we know that emotions are by their very nature temporary things. So they can't be the thing that sustains our love for God. I mean, if I simply rely upon an emotional love for my wife, I'm in big trouble. How many times would I have walked out on her by now because my emotions weren't there? And how many times would she walk out on me? We need something that is much richer and deeper to sustain that love. And it's the same in our love for God. Many Christians get disoriented because they first get saved and there's a lot of passion and a lot of emotion. And then as that dries up, they don't have anything else to sustain faith. And one thing that they're missing is the mind. Loving God includes our emotions, but it also includes our minds. Jesus is asked, what is the great commandment? And he says to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And the idea he's communicating there is to love God with all that you are. And if you did your reading in Smart Faith, you know that the word heart that's used in the New Testament often means all that we are. And sometimes heart is even used to refer to the mind. And there, in the Bible, there's not this dichotomy between heart and mind. But we are to love God with all that we are, including our minds. So that means that it is possible for you and I to have an intellectual love for God. When's the last time you heard that phrase? When was the last time you were encouraged to have an intellectual love for God? I want to submit to you that as you, in this class, as you exercise your intellect, and as you read stuff that may be difficult for you to understand, and as you study, and as you prepare for the test, those are actions of love for God. That you are loving God intellectually. And that it's not just when you're there Sunday morning being led by a worship band and you're caught up in the emotion of it, that's love for God. But that even when you're in your study alone and you're reading something very difficult about God, that is love for God. We need to love God intellectually. In fact, Paul suggests that this is part of the key to our spiritual transformation. In Romans 12:2, he says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Right? Don't be like this world, but instead be transformed. How are we transformed? Be transformed by developing close emotional feelings for Jesus. Paul doesn't say that. Paul here in this pivotal chapter in Romans has the opportunity to elevate something. What does he elevate? He elevates the mind and its role in our spiritual transformation. Don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Maybe, just maybe, we don't see the kind of spiritual transformation in our churches and in our own lives that we would expect to see if we're in relationship with the true and living God, because many of us have not brought our minds into this. And so maybe we've actually short-circuited our spiritual transformation because we don't renew our minds with God's truth. And instead, what happens when you haven't renewed your mind with God's truth? Well, your mind is being renewed by something. There are images and thoughts and ideas out there all the time vying for your mind, fighting for your mind. And Paul warns us in Colossians 2:8. He said, see to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception. He's not talking about philosophy per se. He's talking about empty philosophy, philosophy according to the tradition of men, false philosophy, according to the elementary principles of the world rather than philosophy according to Christ. You see, your mind is being renewed. The question is, what is it being renewed by? How many of us are being renewed by a screen. Our minds are being renewed by that screen. Kaiser Family Foundation found that the average a young person under the age of 18 spends 7.5 hours a day in front of some screen. So it's a TV screen, a movie screen, a computer screen, a smartphone screen. There's no activity they do more besides sleep than watch a screen. Guess what? Minds are being renewed as we watch the screen. How many of us let the culture renew our minds rather than Christ? How many of us have been taken captive by the false ideas of the culture? Because we've had this anti-intellectual view of faith. And what we need to do is recapture philosophy. Philosophy can be a key tool to help us think and renew our minds. Philosophy is simply thinking carefully about questions that matter. Yes, there's a formal discipline of philosophy. That's not what I'm talking about. All of us in here are philosophers. We ought to be thinking carefully about questions that matter. And C.S. Lewis tells us the value of good philosophy. Good philosophy must exist if for no other reason, because bad philosophy needs to be answered. There are false ideas out there that need to be answered. And so philosophy is a very important tool to help us recapture our minds for Jesus Christ. Now, let me introduce you to a distinction in philosophy, okay? There's a couple branches of philosophy, several branches that you need to be aware of at least, okay? The first branch of philosophy is epistemology. And Lenny made reference to this. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy that studies knowledge. This is where we ask questions like, how do we know what we know? Or what counts as knowledge? What does it mean to say I have knowledge of something? That's epistemology. It's the study of knowledge. A second branch of philosophy is what we might call metaphysics. Metaphysics is the study of reality. We look out into the world and our metaphysical questions are, what is real? What's really out there? Is this physical world, this material stuff, is this all that exists, or are there non-material entities? Are there immaterial things out there? Are there things like souls and angels and demons and God? These kinds of things. And metaphysics says what's real. Now, notice there's a distinction between what's real and how we know, right? Very important distinction to maintain. Now, there might be things that are real even if we don't know, or we don't know how to find out whether they're real, right? Does that make sense? And so there are two different branches that are important to distinguish. Now, when it comes to epistemology will help us get clarification on what we mean when we say we know things. And as we think a little more carefully through knowledge, I think it'll help us connect knowledge back with our faith. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about knowledge. And it's important in this, so what we're doing is we're doing epistemology. We're going to look at, okay, what is knowledge? And there are three different kinds of knowledge that you need to be aware of, all right? Here's the first kind of knowledge. It's what we might call propositional knowledge. This is the first kind of knowledge. You might say it's knowing that. There are all kinds of propositions that I know that. I know that Brett Kunkel is a male. I know that I have 5 children. I know that Harvest Fellowship is located in Riverside. There's all kinds of propositional knowledge we have. In fact, this propositional knowledge probably makes up most of the knowledge that we do have. Much of our knowledge is propositional knowledge. We know that such and such, okay? And so that's one kind of knowledge, a very important kind of knowledge. Propositional knowledge is very important. But it's not our only kind of knowledge. There's a second kind of knowledge we might call knowledge by acquaintance. Or you might say it's a knowledge of, knowing of someone or something, or knowing who. This is knowledge by acquaintance. So now I may have, let's just take the first kind of knowledge, propositional knowledge. I may get a book about Paris, France, and I can read that book. And I will have propositional knowledge, if that book is accurate, I'll have propositional knowledge about Paris, France. right? And one thing that book might tell me is that the Eiffel Tower is in Paris, France. So I know that the Eiffel Tower is located in Paris, France, all right? But that's very different than actually flying over to France and walking the streets of Paris and walking up to the Eiffel Tower and beholding it and gaining this second kind of knowledge by acquaintance. By reading about the Eiffel Tower in a book, I don't gain knowledge by acquaintance. I only gain propositional knowledge. But when I go and I visit someplace and I experience it, I gain a different level of knowledge, don't I? Where now I may have knowledge of the Eiffel Tower, not just propositional knowledge that. Does that make sense? You see the distinction, right? So I could know all kinds of propositions about you, but would that mean that I'm a good friend of yours? No, we would want to say something like, friendship requires more than just having, propositional knowledge. If I could just rattle off a bunch of propositions of my wife, is that sufficient for a good marriage? No, you're going to say, well, no, that requires more knowledge, a knowledge of. And so there is this a knowledge by acquaintance. There are things that I can sit in a room with my wife, and we can say nothing to each other, and I can get a sense of her mood, right? I can know if she's upset. Even if she's just sitting there absolutely still, there's this knowledge by acquaintance I have, right? And so there's knowledge by acquaintance. But then there's a third kind of knowledge, what we might call skill knowledge or know-how. Know-how. So even if I gain propositional knowledge about the Eiffel Tower in Paris, France, and even if I go and I experience the Eiffel Tower for myself, and I experience Paris for myself, I might not quite have the know-how to get around Paris. And I might need to spend some time, driving in a car around Paris or walking the streets of Paris before I have know-how to be able to tell somebody how you get around Paris, right? The skill knowledge might come, in form of, knowing how to fix a refrigerator. I mean, this is like a huge area of weakness for me. When something breaks down in our house, I have almost no skill knowledge about anything. I can't use my hands very well when it comes to fixing a broken appliance. I don't have a whole lot of skill knowledge or know-how. But it's another kind of knowledge, you see. Now, think about it. In the Christian life, does the Christian life require that we have knowledge? Absolutely. In fact, listen to what Jesus says in John 17:3. He defines eternal life. He says, this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. You see, eternal life here is being defined in terms of our knowledge. Knowledge is essential to our relationship with God. But now think about it. Is it enough simply to have propositional knowledge about God? Is that all are we saying? Should we just need to know lots of stuff about God? Well, that's certainly not enough, is it? And now it's very important. It's vital. In fact, what we want to be doing is increasing our stock of true propositions about God. The more propositions you know about God, the better. But of course, our knowledge of God requires more than just propositional knowledge or knowledge that. It also requires knowledge of, doesn't it? We enter into a trust relationship with God. We experience God's Spirit ministering to our spirit, convicting of us of sin. So notice that knowledge of God requires knowing that, but also knowing of. There's a relational aspect of it. But then does Christian life also require know-how? Yeah, aren't there certain disciplines, certain ways that we need to know how to live? Certain disciplines that we're supposed to practice? We should have know-how when it comes to the study of Scripture. We should have know-how when it comes to prayer. And so notice all three of these kinds of knowledge are involved in our relationship with God. Knowledge of God is essential in our relationship with Him. Propositional knowledge and skill knowledge and knowledge of, or knowledge by acquaintance, all are important to our relationship with God and what it means to be a Christian. Now let's go back to propositional knowledge. I want to focus on this for a few minutes here. What does it mean to have propositional knowledge? What does it mean to say, I actually know something? Well, philosophers have defined propositional knowledge this way. Knowledge is justified true belief. Knowledge is justified true belief. So that to say I know something requires three things. Number one, it requires belief, right? To say, I mean, it seems pretty odd to say, well, I know that, but I don't believe it. Right? That would be pretty odd. But to say I believe something seems to be required in saying that I know it. And what is belief? Well, belief is a kind of what we might call a positive mental attitude. It's an affirming mental attitude. And so if I believe something, I have an affirming attitude towards that thing. That's what you might say a belief is. Right? But now, if I simply believe something, would we want to say, well, yeah, then you know it? No, it seems like belief and knowledge are two different things. You can't simply believe something and therefore you know it. There seems to be at least another condition, right? And that's where we get, oops, I'm behind on the slides. That's where we get to the issue of truth, right? Justified true belief. So we're kind of working backward here. Not only do you have belief, but you need to have true belief. What do we mean by truth? Well, truth, very simply defined, is that which corresponds to reality. Simple definition. I think it's the common sense view. I think we all know that truth is that which corresponds to reality. Your belief, your ideas, your statements are true if they correspond to reality, if they match up with reality, right? So if someone says, hey, the Deepening Your Faith class begins at 2 o'clock in the loft, that's a belief. How do you confirm the truth of that belief? Well, you came here to the loft and you saw the crowd starting to gather, and you were able to see that your belief corresponds to reality, right? That's common sense. We do it all the time. And so truth is that which corresponds to reality. And so now think about it. So if you have a true belief, that true belief corresponds to reality. Now, is that enough to say that you know it? No, because it seems like you could get lucky on your true beliefs, couldn't it? Maybe you get lucky. So maybe I say E equals MC squared, and you say, I believe that. And you would have a true belief. But maybe you know nothing about science or mathematics. Would we want to say, well, you know that E equals MC squared? Would we want to say that your status of that belief is the same as the scientist or the mathematician who's worked out the calculations and has spent a life studying such things? Would we want to say that you have knowledge just like they have knowledge? No. What's the difference? Well, there's another condition, and that is this third condition, justification. Now think about it. Why are you a Christian? Well, you're a Christian probably because you think that Christianity is true. You believe Christianity is true. I think that's why you should be a Christian. That's why I should be a Christian. That's why Paul says we ought to be Christians. Is because it's true, because Jesus rose from the dead to verify all of his claims. And so you ought to be a Christian because it's true. And so if you believe that Jesus was born of a virgin, and you believe he lived a perfect sinless life, and you believe he died on a cross, and you believe that he rose bodily from the grave 3 days later, and you believe he ascended into heaven, and you believe that he was God incarnate, and you believe that he's a second member of the Trinity, those are true beliefs. Those are beliefs that we would say match up to reality. If they're true, they match up with reality. And that's a good start. But true belief is not enough. It's not enough for us to say, I know. You know, I don't run into very many Christians anymore who say they know anything when it comes to their faith. A lot of Christians will couch it in the language of belief. Well, I believe this. And go back to that presidential debate, right? When Joe Biden is talking about his faith, what does he say? I personally believe this. This is my personal faith. But how many would say, well, I know this to be true? And see, it's not enough to simply for us to have true belief. What we need is this third component of justification that will help turn our true beliefs into knowledge. And I think this is a critical missing part for many of us. Many of us have true beliefs, but maybe you got lucky. We wouldn't call that knowledge, right? But when you have good reasons for your true beliefs, that's the critical third component that takes your true beliefs and gives you confidence now, right? We talked about having trust. Trust is confidence. You want confidence in your trust or your faith in God? Bring in some justification. Know not only what you believe, but why you believe it. Right? Learn why these propositions are true. The why is a critical missing point. Now, I want to show you and contrast this from Mormonism. I'm going to show you a quick video clip here of a Mormon lady talking about her path to faith. And I want you to listen to her justification. Think about what is the justification she's offering and how does that affect faith?
It was not a decision I made with my head. It wasn't, that was what was so odd about it, was that I was raised in academia. Everything made sense. I studied. I was a math brain, a science brain. Everything had to make sense, and this was the first time in my life that I was making the biggest decision I had ever made based on something that I didn't feel that I could or had to prove on paper. I knew that God told me this was true. I knew that I had read the Book of Mormon and that I had prayed and that I had done everything the missionaries told me to do and that I, without any question, knew that this 14-year-old boy in New York, Joseph Smith, was actually a prophet of God and that the Book of Mormon was actually the Word of God and that the truth had been restored. And I couldn't prove it. I didn't have any proof, and so it wasn't anything that was logical. To ask me what I was thinking, I wasn't thinking. I was feeling. And I hadn't ever really been in touch with my emotions before and didn't realize how much more powerful that would be.
Okay, so that is actually a video on Mormon.org that they put out, the LDS Church puts out themselves to promote their views. This is what they offer. Notice, right, they think they have true beliefs about God, about Scripture, about Joseph Smith, about the afterlife. And what is the justification? Ultimately, the justification is a feeling, right, a internal feeling. Now, this is how most Christians talk, isn't it? Right? You ask me how I know he lives within my heart. Now, I certainly think that actually, the real experience of God in our lives, I think, is legitimate. And I think there is the internal witness of the Holy Spirit in our lives actually functions as very solid evidence, okay? But notice there's a difference between knowing myself and showing to others. And so I certainly can't take that subjective experience of the Holy Spirit and take that out of me and put it into other people, can I? And so I'm going to be very limited. I can talk about my experience of God, and I can describe it, and I can give witness and testimony to it. But for many people, that's not enough. They want something else substantial. They want to know, is there historical evidence for this stuff? Does this make sense? Is it coherent? Is it logical? Does it match with science? And what we have as Christians is knowledge that helps justify our true beliefs. And when you can move from simply having true beliefs to then also having justification for your true beliefs, that is going to strengthen your faith. Again, you see the connection between our faith and knowledge. When you and I can grow in our knowledge, when we can grow in our true beliefs and the justification for those true beliefs, what that will do is it will produce more confident Christians. It will produce Christians who have God confidence, who have reasonable trust, who can walk out of church on Sunday and say, I don't just believe, I don't just hope, but I know that I just got done worshiping the God of the universe. I mean, how could we transform our young people if they walked out of our youth groups and our children's ministries after 18 years of training and they walked out saying, I know that this is true. I am confident and I am now ready to engage the world. That's confidence, and that's a confidence that's available to us. And it's not arrogant. It doesn't say, I know and you don't, and so, forget you. No, of course not. That truth, ultimately, the knowledge of the truth should ultimately transform us. And so this is why we want to take theology, deep theology. Theology is the what? It's the content of our faith. Apologetics is the why. We take the what and we put it together with the why, the justification, and we gain knowledge. And this, I think, will go a long way to transforming us. This is a key part of renewing our minds, is the study of theology and the study of apologetics. And I would suggest, think about it, if theology is the study of God, is there any greater subject for you and I to study but the study of God? And ultimately, we want that study then to permeate all of our lives. And that's what apologetics does. Apologetics can be a huge help and a doorway, I think, for many of us into this whole realm of an intellectual life. The Greek word for defense is the word apologia. That's where we get apologetics, right? In 1 Peter 3:15 is kind of the key verse that we point to. And so here, let's kind of try to tie this up together here. We talked about how the anti-intellectual view of faith really short circuits, I think, a lot of our Christian life, and it disconnects it from all areas of life. And so what we need to do is, number one, we need to recapture the biblical view. The biblical view of faith is what? Someone define it. What is faith? If I said, what is faith? It's trust. It's trusting in what you have good reason to believe is true, right? You want a real simple definition. JP defines it in the book there. Faith is trusting in what you have good reason to believe is true. And so what we've done is we've reattached faith to the intellect, to our minds, to knowledge, to evidence. And so then we explore this realm of knowledge and we discover that, gosh, in Jesus Christ are hidden all the riches of wisdom and knowledge, as Paul writes. We have the source of knowledge. We have the source of truth in God himself. All truth that is out there, whether it's in this book, does this book contain all truth? Does it contain all the truths that can be known? Everything in here we would say is true and we can know, but does this book contain all truths about the universe? We wouldn't want to say it contains every single truth about the universe, right? Because there are truths that we learn. I mean, no finite book can contain every truth about the universe. I mean, certainly this doesn't give us any information about how aspirin or ibuprofen helps with pain, right? But are those truths? Absolutely. But are those somehow divorced from God? No, God, the creator of all things, is the source of all truth. So this is the ultimate source of truth, the authority on truth. But it doesn't give us all truth. There are other areas where we study and we gain truth. And the idea, here's what we want to do. Go back to that 2-story house. We want to smash that 2-story house. And instead, I want you to think in terms of Christianity as the total truth about reality. In fact, write that phrase down. Christianity is the total truth about reality. All truth is God's truth. And Christianity, the Holy Scriptures, give us not just faith, but the Scriptures give us knowledge of reality. And you and I should have more confidence that this book tells us about reality than any scientist, any PhD, anyone else out there. Christianity is what we call a knowledge tradition. It gives us knowledge of reality, and we need to recapture that. And that's what this book and this class will help us do, is to recapture the role of knowledge in our Christian life so that we can be transformed like God intended us. Now, let me close with this question. If Christianity is not true, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, should you believe it? No. Right? 1 Corinthians 15. We should be pitied. It's a waste of time. It's worthless. But, if it is true that Jesus rose bodily from the grave 2,000 years ago, if that is a fact of reality, well, then that changes everything, doesn't it? Amen. All right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to stick around. For those of you who have questions, I know that there's a lot of different topics we can converse on. Why don't we, I know we're over time a little bit. So, would it be okay, D.A.? I mean, can I let people go, and those who want to stay and ask questions? Can we still use the mic and get? Okay. If you need to go, feel free to go. But if you want to ask some questions, I'll stick around up here, and we'll do a few questions. Okay.
What's that?
Oh, one question, Daniel, is can they get the video on this? Can we get Daniel's video?
We'll have a video available either online or available on DVD in the bookstore.
Yeah, and I would encourage you. I don't expect for you to sit here for 2 hours and understand and absorb everything that we talked about, okay? And if you walk out here and go, wow, there was a lot of stuff and some of it went over my head, and that's okay. Stick with it. Rewatch the video. Reread the chapters, okay? All right, any other questions? Yeah. My definition of knowledge, remember. Oh, my definition of justification, good question. I would say justification is, I might just say something like it's adequate reasons or good reasons for something. So if I have justification, I have good reasons for it. And so that reason, now that reasons could be logical reasons, could be evidential, could be historical, whatever. But yeah, I'd say very broadly, justification would be good reasons. Yeah. Question? Oh, this was the last point. What was the question on the? Oh. How did Jesus' disciples die and why did they die? I'd encourage you. Go this week and do a little search on the death of the disciples. And look at how Jesus' disciples died horrible deaths. All of them were martyred except for John, who experienced torture and was exiled to the island of Patmos. There's a DVD on the. Yeah. Yeah, and the question there that I want you to think about is, why would these guys who were closest to Jesus, right, who followed Jesus, and then they see him crucified, something happens a few days later, they're transformed. What would explain their transformation? So much so that each one of these men dies a horrendous death because they proclaimed the message of Jesus' death and resurrection. What would best explain the transformation of these men? I think that's evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. I don't think there's any explanation outside of the resurrection, a historical resurrection, that would best explain why these men died for what they died for. Yeah, so that was kind of the question behind that. Yeah. Other questions? Any other questions? All right, you're formally dismissed. I'll stick around. If you got any questions, you can feel free to come talk to me.